And welcome everyone to the very first presentation of this new talk, Requirements Reuse, Fantasy or Feasible. This presentation is based on my new book, Software Requirements, 3rd edition, which as I mentioned was just published. In fact, it was released only 2 weeks ago, co-authored with Beatty of a company called C-Level. I just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you just a little bit about this book. Some of you might be familiar with the 2nd edition or possibly even the 1st edition of the book. It was published as a 2nd edition in 2003, so we thought it was time to do an update, and this really is a very significant enhancement over the 2nd edition. Even if you have the 2nd edition, I think you'll find that there's a great deal of information in here that will be of value to you. In fact, there's 95,000 more words in here. There's a lot of additional content. We've added a lot of information around certain areas, including eliciting requirements. Quality attributes has really been beefed up, as has business requirements and the role of the business analyst, which has certainly got a lot of visibility these days, and also a lot of guidance around writing high-quality requirements. We've added several chapters, one on data requirements, another one, as you're going to hear about today, on requirements reuse, and also a chapter on requirements for agile projects. And in addition to that, we added many sections throughout the book on how to apply certain requirements practices in various chapters on agile projects, because certainly that's something a lot of people have been interested in. And incidentally, I have just below the image of the cover on the right there, I've got a condensed URL that you can use to get more information about the book, and you can pick up a copy. And then we added a very interesting new section of new chapters on requirements for various particular project classes, including separate chapters on how to handle requirements for enhancement and replacement projects, outsourced projects, package solutions that a lot of people use these days, business process automation, business analytics, a very hot topic, and also embedded in other real-time systems. So we're real excited about this new book, and I hope you check it out and get excited about it too. Reuse is an eternal goal for people who have been seeking increased software productivity. People think most often in terms of code reuse, but many other software project components also have good reuse potential, like requirements, for example. At its heart, reuse means taking advantage of work that has been done previously, whether on the same project or on an earlier project. Anytime you can avoid starting from scratch, you've got a running start on your project. But systematic requirements reuse doesn't seem to be practiced very widely, according to one relatively recent survey. So this presentation is going to talk about several kinds of requirements reuse, identify some classes of requirements information that have good reuse potential in certain contexts, and offer some suggestions about how to make requirements reuse work for you. So here are the topics that I want to talk about this morning. Well, it's morning here in Portland, Oregon. I don't know what time it is where you are. First of all, why is this important? What are some of the advantages of reusing requirements? There are 3 dimensions of requirements reuse that we can consider, and I'll share those with you. We'll point out some of the kinds of information that you might want to reuse in a given situation and various common reuse scenarios. You know, it turns out that just because you have a requirement doesn't necessarily mean that it's in good shape to be reused at the moment, so I'll give you some suggestions about making requirements reusable. Also, to help you get into how would you do this in practice, I'm going to share with you, make you aware of some reuse barriers that people often have to wrestle with, and some success factors that will help it work for you and your environment. And finally, a few tips for getting started with requirements reuse if you decide after today that it's something you think is worthwhile for your organization. So let's start by thinking about, why is this important? So the motivations for reusing requirements information should be obvious, but let's itemize some of them here. First of all, we get higher team productivity. Reusing requirements can make everyone on the team more productive, including business analysts, developers, and testers. As a result, this can lead to faster solution delivery as well as reduced development costs, which is something everybody's happy with. Now, from the user's perspective, requirements reuse can improve functional consistency both across and within sets of members of a product line or among a set of business applications. Think about, as an example, the ability to format blocks of text by applying the same styling and spacing, angled text colors, and all these other properties that you can do, say, in all of the Microsoft Office applications. I find it really annoying when I can do certain formatting, say, in PowerPoint, but I can't do the same sort of formatting in the same way, or maybe even do it at all in Word. this to me is very irritating when this is supposed to be an integrated set of applications. So by having this kind of reuse of requirements and behaviors of the system, it reduces the learning curve for people who are moving from one application to another, and it also leads to less frustration on the part of people like me who say, hey, how come I can't make it look like that over here when I could over there? So making this kind of functionality work in a uniform fashion involves reusing both functional requirements and usability requirements. So this also saves time during requirements development when you don't have to specify similar requirements repeatedly if you're going to be doing it the same way in another application that the same company is building. If you can reuse existing high-quality requirements, this leads to fewer defects in the product, and naturally that reduces the amount of rework you're going to have to do to fix the system. Now, nobody wants to reuse garbage, so you really do need good requirements for this to pay off. So I think there are some pretty compelling arguments for looking into reusing requirements as well as any other kind of knowledge and artifacts on a project. So we can think of three dimensions of reuse. And the first is the extent of reuse, the extent of the assets that you have available that you're attempting to reuse. Second dimension is the extent to which an item that you have around has to be modified to be used in a new setting. And finally, there's the mechanism that you're using to perform the reuse. And we'll be talking about all of these different dimensions on the next slides because there are several possibilities for each one of them. So when you're contemplating reusing requirements information, think about which option that I'm going to share with you in each of these three dimensions is most appropriate and practical for meeting your objectives. So the first dimension is the extent of reuse, the quantity of material that you're reusing. And there's a whole range of possibilities here. You might reuse just a single functional requirement to say, okay, we're going to do this same thing somewhere else. And one place this shows up, incidentally, is if you're taking a use case approach to specifying requirements, then sometimes you'll find that multiple use cases contain a bit of the same functionality. And so you might find that that functionality, even within a same application, has multiple opportunities for being reused. Or you might reuse a single requirement statement along with any associated attributes, such as its rationale for being included in the product, or its origin, where did it come from, or its priority, if those attributes are also relevant to the current project. In some cases, you can reuse not just the requirement, but also other associated artifacts, like data definitions, acceptance tests, or relevant business rules, and so forth. So you've got a nice little package. And that's what we're doing here. We're kind of moving from the bottom of just say, okay, here's a requirement we can reuse, up towards having a whole little package of information that you can reuse. Sometimes you can use reuse a set of related requirements, such as all of the functionality associated with a specific feature. And we'll talk more about reusing sets of information a little bit later. Even farther along, that you might find that you can reuse some design elements. I mean, that's really kind of moving in the ultimate direction of what's sometimes called drag-along reuse. In the ideal scenario, you can reuse a whole package of requirements, analysis models, design components, code, and tests. So in this case, which doesn't happen as often as we'd like, but it's certainly feasible, you can reuse an entire chunk of implemented functionality essentially unchanged from a related product. And this is called drag-along reuse because you're dragging the downstream work products along with the requirement itself into another project. So as an example here of how you can maybe look at the ways of using different sets of requirements in different environments, let's just see something that I'm going to have to deal with in just a couple of weeks, something we all deal with from time to time, which is taking a flight. So we want to think about maybe how you could reuse requirements across projects, even if the implementation varies in different environments. There are some things you need to do when you check in for a flight, right? You might have to print your boarding passes. You might want to change seats or upgrade